Welcome to the coverage of the inauguration of President Barack Obama. This is the Real News Network. And a few minutes ago, you saw President Bush in his helicopter flying and leaving the stage of history. That is, unless someone actually does charge him with war crimes or some other criminal offense, which I guess is a little unlikely, and we'll be discussing that later today and tomorrow. You also saw, of course, the historic moment of the inauguration of Barack Obama. Need I say, first African-American president of the United States, who delivered his long-awaited inauguration speech. And to discuss their reactions to the speech, and for me to ask questions that probably will give some hint of my reactions to the speech, I'm first of all joined by Leila Fadel in Baghdad. Leila is the bureau chief in Baghdad for McClatchy Newspapers. And in the studio, Gareth Porter, who is an investigative historian and journalist and a frequent commentator on the Real News Network. Thank you both for joining us. Leila, I'm going to start with you. First of all, as someone who grew up with one foot in the United States and one foot in the Middle East, how did you react just emotionally to the speech? And then we'll kind of dig in more into the substance.
Well, you know, as a journalist, we don't have opinions.
That's true. You don't have emotions, but what you could do is, if you had emotions, Leila, how would you have reacted? And as we know, this is, as a journalist, you can't really do this. Yes.
Of course, you know, I'm a daughter of an immigrant, and today a son of an immigrant became president. A man whose name isn't typical. Barack Hussein Obama is the president of the United States. It's a great thing. It says something about the evolution of our nation and the fact that it shows finally a reflection of what our nation is made up of, which is people from all over. We are all immigrants to America. And so, of course, it's a great and emotional time for Americans.
Gareth, again, same question. Just an emotional reaction, and then we'll get into our analytical journalist heads.
Well, I think I'm having a similar problem, of course, actually reacting with emotion because I'm so accustomed now to sifting out the emotional issues and really focusing on the analysis. But, you know, definitely, you know, you cannot help but be struck by the moments here of the black population of the United States really responding to the first black president. You saw a scene of John Lewis responding to his speech, and then of course Joseph Lowry giving the benediction, and you know, I think that is for me the emotional highlight of this hour and this day.
I think there'll be a lot of conversation on most of the news networks of whether the speech reached the 10 out of 10 people wanted it to, and mostly I think emotionally. Let's dig a little more in substance, and as both of you are a little bit more involved in foreign policy, let's talk about your own reaction in terms of what, if anything, it tells us any more about the Obama foreign policy, his attitude towards the world, and a little bit about how you think people are going to hear this speech around the world. And obviously one of the most important places in terms of U.S. foreign policy of how people will hear the speech is Iraq. So let's start. How do you think people in Iraq are going to react to this speech?
I'm going to be quite honest. I don't think a lot of people in Iraq, regular Iraqis, sat glued to their televisions today to watch Barack Obama's speech. When we were out today speaking to people, most of them said they didn't care. They felt that U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and inside Iraq was set, and it would be the same. The only thing that most people did speak about was that Barack Obama has been vocal about wanting to withdraw from Iraq, which he mentioned again in his speech today, responsibly leaving Iraq to its people. And that's many Iraqis' number one issue. They want American troops off Iraqi soil.
There was one phrase in the speech, I'll read it to you. It said, to leaders around the globe who sow conflict or blame their society's ills on the West, know that your people will judge you on what you can build, not what you destroy. I doubt he had Iraq in mind when he said that. I'm expecting he's talking about other Arab governments, maybe even some Latin American governments. But still, how are people in Iraq going to take, don't blame your ills on the West?
Well, I think in the Arab world as a whole, when you talk to Iraqis, they both identify as Iraqi as well as Arab. There is a lot of blame on the West for the current situation, both in Iraq and other Arab nations. Either it be because they feel that their leaders who they don't think are good enough are being propped up by the American administration of the past. Iraq has been affected and its fate has been intertwined with America for years now, longer than the war. Because there were the sanctions, there was the 1991 Gulf War, there was the relationship between Saddam Hussein and America before they became enemies. And all of that they remember when they look at America, and they know that whatever Obama does in the next 4 years will affect them intimately and will decide their fate ultimately.
Gareth, what's your reaction in terms of what you think it tells us about the tone at very least? I don't think there's anything new in terms of policy because he didn't dig into anything. It's more really a setting of tone.
I think you're right, Paul. It is a tone that was set in regard to foreign policy. And I have to say that I was struck in both hearing it the first time and then reading the text with the number of times in the speech that he really signaled, in terms of tone, an emphasis on restraint and humility. He actually used those terms in the speech, which is striking in itself. But on Iraq, on Afghanistan, you don't have a sort of assertion of determination to stay the course, obviously not using those words, but even anything close to that. Instead, he talked about forging a peace in Afghanistan. That's a rather striking term to use in the present circumstances when, we've just had a report that he's about to approve a massive increase in U.S. troop strength there. He didn't use the word Iran at all in the speech, which is very interesting.
And he didn't mention any country, I think.
Well, except for
and
Afghanistan and Iraq, yes.
Yeah.
And the fact that he didn't mention Iran by name and didn't talk about approaching test of strength or of wills or anything like that, I think is also an important signal.
Leila, I was struck, I guess, that I think a lot with Obama is setting a feeling, setting a tone, and maybe you learn more from his objectives in that than you do from the actual words. If I had to put one word on this speech myself, I would call it, certainly compared to the rhetoric we've heard for many years, I would call it modest. And it sets a kind of modest tone. What do you think, and how do you think people might react to that?
I mean, I personally reading the speech, I think he doesn't name Iran, but I think in the line where he talks about extending a hand if you're willing to unclench your fist, I think Iran will read that as speaking to them. Their foreign minister came out today and said that they expect Obama to fulfill his campaign promises in order to unfreeze ties between Iran and the United States, which has been a tumultuous relationship that has directly affected Iraq. And if that relationship can improve, maybe things can change here as well. But there's also still, as there always seems to be, that idea that we will not apologize for our ways, that we will defend the way we are and our freedoms and sometimes in the Muslim world, I think that is perceived very hostily, as if coming at you, telling you, we're not going to say, I don't know how to put this, we're not going to change anything about us, we expect you to change. But at the same time, we want to come towards the Muslim world with mutual respect, mutual interest, which is something I think people will appreciate.
But I would also say, Gareth, maybe from my own opinion, I'm guessing how Muslims might react to this, how the Muslim world would react. Is that not a little too modest? In the sense that much of the Muslim world, and I don't know if it should be called Muslim world or Arab world. I don't know that it's such a religious division.
Well, the Muslim world is much larger than the Arab world.
Yeah, this is true. Feel that I don't know just the words mutual respect are enough, and it wouldn't surprise me. Perhaps he might have wanted to have said more, but he's been vetting his foreign policy appointments through John McCain. He had an inaugural ball last night where John McCain was the guest of honor, and President Obama made a speech sort of lauding McCain. He met a few days ago with all the cabal of right-wing commentators, William Christo and David Brooks and George Will, and Krauthammer was there. And so is there a bit that, like, can you be all things to all people, especially if all people include the neoconservatives who have been waging this last 8 years foreign policy?
Well, of course not. You're going to have to make decisions which are going to alienate some people and be more regarded as more favorable by others. I would personally not take too seriously having sitting down for dinner with neoconservatives or conservatives.
Oh, it's not the sitting down to dinner. Let me say, it's the report back from the neoconservatives, who came away rather happy with what they heard.
Well,
I
and
mean,
of course,
think
yes.
I think you could have dinner with just about anybody on earth.
Can I-
Yeah, go ahead, Leila.
Interject for
Yeah,
a
please
second?
do.
I think that this speech is purposely vague because you cannot, as Gareth was saying, you cannot be all things to all people. The thing on every person's mind in the Middle East right now is what happened between Hamas and Israel in the last 3 weeks. And what was said in this speech was nothing. And that is the issue. When you went out today in Iraq, where there are American troops across the street, they didn't talk about whether or not Americans will leave first. They talked about Gaza first. They talked about Palestinians first. They talked about 1,300 people dead. That's what they talked about. And they said in the end, they don't care who comes into the White House because the lobbyists control. And that's
Okay.
what they said. And this speech is vague.
So what we're
For
going
that
to
reason,
we're going to
you
take
can't just-
we're going to take a very short break, Leila, and we're going to come back for another segment of our conversation. We're going to pick it up right here. So please join us in literally about 2 minutes or a minute when we're going to come back and carry on the conversation. Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network, and we will be right back.